ready.
Yeah, Brenda, I do a backup recording too, if you can.
Yep.
Okay, we're all set.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our policy committee meeting for today, Tuesday, June 1st, and the time is approximately 5:33 p.m. First item on our agenda is the approval of minutes. Diana and Godfrey, were you able to take a look at the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any questions or discussions?
No.
All looks good? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Great. And seconded, Diana?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So moved. Before we start and I introduce many of our guests today, I did want to start off with, during our last policy meeting, we did discuss in earnest, we had a robust meeting about the school governance councils, and it really was for discussion purposes only. And there were also some ideas and some potential revisions as well. But before we bring that back to the policy committee meeting, we thought it was really important for our central office folks to reach out to our school governance councils, our chairs, and many of our members to kind of get their input, their thoughts, ideas, and suggestions before we bring it back to the policy committee. So I wanted, for full disclosure, I wanted to let the school governance council know that. We will be doing some outreach with further dialogue before we bring that back to the policy committee meeting. Thank you for that. The next item on our agenda is the equity and diversity policy. But before we start that, I'm really excited tonight that we have many members from our high schools coming here tonight to discuss this. And I know Bob Kosianda is here as well. And we'll also be giving some insight and some thought. But I want to introduce our members that are here tonight. Our student reps, and we're really proud. I know that they're really excited to be here tonight via Zoom, and we want to thank them personally for coming. From Norwalk High School, we have Maria and Nia. From P-Tech, we have Sarah and Julian. From Brian McMahon, we have Samantha and Roja. And from Center for Global Studies, Mallory and Alejandro. Hopefully I haven't mispronounced any of your names, but I know many of you. So if you can just kind of give a quick hi so we kind of know who you are. I know you have your names, but thank you so much for being part of the discussion tonight. And we really feel to have student representation is so important when we craft and design specific policies. And we know we've worked with Dr. Fergus, we've spoken, I've actually had a lot of dialogue with Bob Kosianda over the years and in regards to this as well. I know there's been some work in Stanford. So, you know, we've discussed potentially having a statement first and then possibly having a policy, but we really tonight wanted to get input from many of our student leaders and all of your leaders. And I know you've worked really hard over the years in your respective high schools. So we'd like to hear from you kind of what you're looking for. We also, tonight, I'm hoping we're going to be able to also discuss a student bill of rights. But if we're unable to, I might have all of you kind of work together on something for a student bill of rights and then come back to policy and kind of talk to me about it. And then at a future meeting, we can have you come back and we can again have further discussion on that. So Bob, I know you've done a lot of work on this. Do you want to kind of get any input and then we can have some of our student representatives give their thoughts on this as well?
Well, what I think we bring to the table, and by we I mean Sam and Roja, is input that we gave to our sister program in Stanford, they're known as the Mayor's Youth Leadership Council, MILC. They were asked by the Stanford Board of Ed to review the CABE model policy on equity and diversity. The MILC members then turned to CYL, Center for Youth Leadership at McMahon, and said, can you guys give us a hand? And we did. We reviewed the document, and most of our input revolved around increasing student partnership in developing the policy and writing the regulations, and then also expanding the words and phrases under the shared vocabulary section. And those were a list of definitions about racism, institutional racism, equity, and so on. The Stanford Board of Ed, their policy committee approved it, and then the Stanford Board of Ed approved the policy, I think about a week ago. and the Stanford people are waiting to write the regulations with the Stanford superintendent.
Awesome. Brenda, I
Great
don't know
work.
if you, yeah, fantastic work on this. I don't know if you have that policy, if you want to show it to us from Stanford. I think all of you have been able to take a look at it, but maybe we can present that and kind of take a brief look at it.
Or let me see if I can share my screen here.
Okay,
Heidi, may I add one thing?
sure, yeah, go ahead.
After the policy committee, during the review of the document with the students' input by the policy committee in Stanford, there was a policy committee meeting, and there were remarks from the public. There was a gentleman who came on, and he was fine. He was not an attorney, he admitted that, but he thought that the policy itself was unconstitutional, so on and so forth. So the policy committee actually pulled it back for a week, and they had the attorney, the Board of Ed attorney in
Yeah.
Stanford review it. He reached out to CABE, and CABE said, no, we vetted this policy left and right. It is not unconstitutional. You may run with it. And then the full board reviewed it and approved it.
Thank you for that. That's why we're fortunate to have Tom Mooney, who's our legal guru here. So also to take a look at this as well. So we appreciate that. And then we have Dr. Fergus here, who's done a lot of work with us on this as well.
So I don't know, Heidi, if you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the prior version that's a draft, and it included sort of
Yeah.
the blue piece, as I understand it, Bob, is the pieces that the students both in the Center for Youth Leadership and the Stanford Mayor's Youth Leadership Council as well added to the draft. They have not yet published the final one, so.
That's correct, Brenda. And Heidi, I just want to be fair here. I believe the policy committee reached out to other student groups in Stanford. I think maybe the Boys and Girls Club, but I am not certain which groups submitted suggestions.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just thought it was important, thanks for your input, Bob, on this. And I know the work that many of your students have done on this, but, I know that we've discussed with Dr. Fergus, working on something like this, possibly having it as a statement, potentially having it as a policy. But I think that's why for us, it's not something we want to rush through as a policy committee. And that's why we wanted our student leaders to be part of this, to give their input and what they're seeing and what they would like to see in a statement/policy. And I know that, this has been vetted, which you had mentioned, but I thought it was important just to kind of give some highlights and kind of review this briefly in case anybody hasn't looked at this.
I wonder, Heidi, if our attorney.
Yep.
is-
You know what, Alex, I'm sorry. You know what I'm going to suggest? If anyone is not muted, to just mute,
I
just
fixed
because we
it.
have so many people here. So I think if you're not talking or speaking, if you could just mute yourself and then unmute
Yeah.
yourself if you're speaking.
It was my mistake. I had the mic unmuted here. I'm wondering if our attorney, Attorney Mooney, is familiar with the Stanford process. And if not, if he's engaged in other processes similar to theirs, where he can give us some insight in terms of some of the legal components that we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about the policy. And on the same token, I guess, if Dr. Fergus can provide some insight in terms of his expertise and what he's done with other districts in putting a resource similar to this in other districts across the country.
Great
I'm happy
suggestion.
to speak briefly if it would be helpful. I was not involved in the drafting in Stamford. I believe the city attorney handled that. I did have an opportunity to read the policy carefully. And I think the policy complies with all legal requirements. The problem that can sometimes arise is when people of goodwill write policies that have the effect of driving decisions on individual cases on the basis of race or some other protected characteristic. That's where we get into equal protection issues under the United States Constitution. But the policy that I read that you sent from Stanford focuses on efforts. It does talk about measuring efforts by outcomes, which is important, but it does not require that decisions be made in individual cases on the basis of race. So I, having read through it, I come here with no particular caution. I think it reflects a great deal of hard work, and I don't believe that it raises any legal problems directly.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of, sit in and listen to this journey that you all are taking, right? And I so appreciate, Heidi, your point around there's no need for us to rush and really doing this gathering of for what makes the most sense is really such thoughtful and a really thoughtful process that you all are taking. I really appreciate that. And then having students as our sounding board of, so how does this stuff land for them? Because they are the consumers of what we're trying to do is I think it's also a really great move. I think one of the things that, as we, there's a couple of buckets of things that I want to kind of frame. One is being able to be clear around what's a statement that we want to make, and then what's a policy that we want to construct, right? And so whenever we're thinking about policy, we want to be for it to provide us a landscape of where we're trying to go and what we're trying to be as we're constructing that policy. So my question will be, as you're thinking about sort of the policy, right, itself, the equity policy is, what are those sort of elements that that we've realized we want to create some hallmarks that become sort of quintessential of Norwalk, right? That are pieces that we as a community are investing in, right? And a statement allows us to in some ways begin establishing and situating what's the texture of our mission and vision as a community that is striving towards realizing this equity policy, kept bringing it to life. And in some ways, the statement may provide us greater texture of explaining the policy than the policy itself, right? Because I think as Thomas was alluding, like, we want to stay within certain lines, right? But we want to push the lines as well, right? In terms of how we end up just, sort of framing out what you're discussing here in terms of an equity policy. And the last thing I'll mention is that taking this opportunity to actually build something like this is a way to also remind ourselves that we have to institutionalize the way in which we are wanting to operate, right? Because it is, I'm always very mindful that, we can have great leaders existing amongst us all the time. But unless we are creating institutionalized sort of elements of where we are trying to go, these things could easily fall by the wayside if they don't become institutionalized in some way as part of the fabric of the community. And policy is one way to kind of ensure that happens. And in some ways, it's also making a commitment to the students who are attending schools, like, we're committed to ensuring that we are supporting your equitable outcomes by putting it as part of weaving it into the tapestry of who we are as a community. And so I wholeheartedly sort of am in support of sort of your endeavor in terms of moving into this direction, and having examples like Stanford one and others who have gone down this road, and also hearing about their, I think Bob kind of alluded to some of the potential landmines that may show up, right? How do we manage through those so that we are able to kind of have a thoughtful response in contending with some of those conditions that are going to show up.
This is great. Thank you. And I think, and I know that there's been, Dr. Fergus and Brenda, there's been outreach already. I know that we've had kind of focus groups and discussions with the community. And I think maybe we might have a little bit more of that as well as we kind of craft this statement that possibly can turn into a policy. And I think it would be important, and a little bit, I'm going to switch it over to our student representatives, kind of make it unique to Norwalk. We have a K policy that's kind of unique to Stamford as well. And what we can kind of do to kind of incorporate that into Norwalk Public Schools. So I'd like to, and not to put our students on the spot, but any volunteers that kind of want to talk a little bit about this policy or what your vision is and what you're thinking might work for Norwalk Public Schools. So if any of our student leaders would like to add anything and what they think, what their thoughts are so far. Any hands up?
Could I say
Yeah, sure.
as a way to kind of prime the students,
Yeah.
asking them, and I some of you I recognize because I think I've been on some panels with some of you, and I know y'all got a lot to say. So I'm wondering, what kind of equity do you need, right?
Yeah.
What kind of equity do you need to experience in your schools that you would love to see happening in your schools?
Well, I would like to go first, and just thinking about equity in our schools, one of the things we want to see is equity in our classes where everyone has the equal opportunity starting from the beginning to be able to be in a class of a higher level, because many of us are capable, but unfortunately, due to equity issues, many of us aren't able to go into those classes. There's also equity in terms of being able to take standardized testing. There's others who are getting some help that others aren't getting. So therefore, we want that also to be dealt with in a way where everyone has the equitable resources to find help educationally. And there's all these different opportunities in which whenever something is being enacted into a school, you want to have an equity look at that before it is enacted in order to ensure that all students have that equal opportunity to be able to participate in that program. And it's looking at all students' needs, not only one exact group.
I also think to add on to what Rose just said, this idea of equity is a really umbrella term. And even if you had read it, like if you read through all of the definitions in the Stamford policy that had been added in, there's so many more to go through under the realm of equity. And a really big idea of that is, yes, equity in the classroom, but it can't just be, oh, we have to have a classroom with equal opportunity, because as great as that sounds, it's not as easy as it sounds. So in those situations of any classroom, there needs to also be equity in dealing with a situation where something unequitable happens, whether it's institutionalized racism, whether it's an incident of hate in the classroom. People have to know how to respond to them, and that has to be on both the student and teacher side. It can't just be that one person knows how to deal with it, because the person that doesn't know how to deal with it then might be the one in the situation, and that's not equitable. And that's like doubling on to the idea of, we want to be equitable, but we're not allowing anybody to know that they have the right to an equitable classroom. So how can we as a district say that, oh yes, we want equity in our classrooms, if we're not going to then say, but if there isn't, how do we ensure that students and teachers know that they have the right to equity, and there are ways in the classroom, in that moment, in the hallway, in that moment, to address the situation that benefits the person who is affected by the unequitable situation.
Just to add on, I agree with Samantha, especially the hallway situation. It's definitely challenging. And I feel like when writing policy about equity and diversity, that's pretty much all paper focused, but I feel like they should be more action focused. Like, for example, there would be situations where there's a moment where it's not equitable, where it's unfair. How would a teacher deal with that? How would a student, how would a counselor right in that moment deal with that? They're not going to refer, they're not going to say, oh, can I go back to the paperwork 1 second and check? It should become more natural So I feel like the policy should also have like a leading hand in moment action, like to assess the equity in the moment, more of like just stating it overall, because the Stanford policy that I was reading over, it's very specific, but it dives in more into the what if happened. I feel like this policy should dive into more it's happening instead of what if it happened, because of course it's going to happen.
It's a lot of valuable information and input. And you're also brave. I forgot to mention to come here tonight. We certainly, wanted everyone to speak if they're comfortable speaking and giving suggestions and thoughts, or maybe just listening. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to just kind of listen to what others might be saying. Alejandro, did you have something? Good. Okay.
Yeah, so I personally can't really say about, this happened at this time or this, because in CGS, equity has always been a priority. Since the moment I got there, since freshman orientation, hey, we're all equal here. Don't you forget about it. I had teachers telling me, hey, I don't care where you come from or anything. We're all equal here. Let's work for what you're gonna get, But what I will say is, I think a great way that we can achieve that is through conversation. Just this conversation right here, or those groups that we have, works, because whenever you try to have a conversation in school, sometimes teachers try avoiding the questions, or maybe try changing the subject. I don't think that should happen. I think we need to have these conversations, because this is how we clearly can outline, we need this, we need that, we don't need this, we don't need that, this works, this does not work. So I just want to say this is really good, having these type of conversations.
Thank you. Dr. Estrella, I know that you meet with many of our students on a monthly basis. If you want to maybe share some of that, but I could tell just by the input we're receiving tonight is so valuable for us to formulate our statement possibly into a policy. But I know you have continuous conversations with students. Is there anything you want to share with us tonight about that?
So I think Samantha and Roja are part of that group, and it would be great. I don't think we've heard from Samantha yet. If you can talk a little bit about some of the conversations we've had around some of the things that you would like to see different, as well as other members of that group.
I just spoke, but I also remember, I think
I thought Rojas just spoke, I'm sorry.
She's looking for that, yeah.
and I have gone, but I know that Nia at one point had very strong feelings about it, and I don't know if she wants, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Nia, but if you wanted to.
Who did you say, Samantha?
Nia.
Nia.
What do you think, Nia?
Yeah, I can talk for a little bit. Yeah, I know something. Like, I was working with a couple other students at Norwalk High earlier in the year, really focused on equity in terms of content in what we're teaching in schools. So that, I don't know if that's something that gets addressed in policy work.
Can you repeat that, Nia?
About content, Nia? I think you should talk about that. That would be great.
Yeah, that was something that I was passionate about and spent a lot of time working on earlier in the year, was looking at making sure that the content, kind of specifically in history and kind of civics classes, because that's very focused on diversity and people's stories and histories and backgrounds, and making sure that there's representation there and we're not kind of having a limited perspective in our teaching. But this can be applied to any class. The question of equity applies to all subjects, I think. So I think it's important these days. It will feel tone deaf if students can tell that the content that they're learning isn't I don't know, being conscious at all of the breadth of diversity that we have in our district and stuff. So I'm not sure if that's something that gets addressed in policy work, or how that would show up in policy, but maybe it can in ours. Maybe that can be something unique to the Norwalk work.
Thank you. That's what we were talking about, right? Making it unique to us here in Norwalk, and it might look a little different than Stanford, even though we're similar to Stanford and Danbury, but it could be unique to Norwalk. Dr. Fergus, do you want to add anything about some of the focus groups and some of the outreach and things you've done over time? Might be helpful too, to give some content, further content.
Sure, definitely. I mean, first I want to say, I am loving your students and how the metacognitive work that they're doing right now is so amazing, and really sort of highlighting, your insightfulness around, and I appreciate you all kind of, on one hand, kind of unsure of whether policy can do certain things, but still putting it out there, and everything that you all said, policy can do, right? And so you're pointing at sort of the right areas: curriculum, the content, the type of instruction that we have going on, the interactional styles, right? That there's ways in which we can have statements that give the direction for how those things can operate, right? So it's like, like you have the state policy in Connecticut that has outlined your African-American Latinx history course, but then there is, but that can land in particular communities that don't know what to do with that, right? And I think what you all are saying is we want to be the community that has a lens, and our statement and our policy gives us and outlines what that lens is. So I really appreciate what you all are highlighting here. And it coincides with many of the things that we heard from, parent communities and also from staff regarding what they're looking to see as the types of equitable outcomes that they desire within Norwalk, right? So they're also messaging that, hey, we want a way in which we are ensuring equitable representation in curriculum, that there's equitable representation when we're thinking about the hiring process. There's a lot of conversation regarding the school governance council, who gets to be on it, right? The special education process, the discipline process, right? There was a lot of conversation where folks are looking for equitable outcomes in there. And part of what they also provided is the language around how they're currently thinking is their equity lens that will help guide how we make those types of reforms in those areas. And I think there's good stuff. And I think I had mentioned this at one of our prior meetings about the possibility of using this great information we've already gathered from a lot of different stakeholders to use as our place of starting to draw up a working statement for Norwalk, statement that leads to a policy or what have you. Because there's good stuff that that's already been gathered from the community, and in hearing the students actually sort of talk about this, I'm excited about that there's great concert between what the students said, what the parents said, and what staff said also.
I think you might have mentioned like somewhere in there the new curriculums and new classes that were coming in, and we, as a group at McMahon, reviewed the social justice curriculum that we were given by the history department. And we liked a lot of what we saw in it. But what was interesting to us was there was all of this push for a new class, and the class was continuously switched between the two schools. And there was no advertisement for the class because the official classes weren't put in until after course selection closed for both high schools. So as great as your policy is, your policy is only as good as you allow it to be. And for this specific thing, and I think it relates back to when writing this policy, it has to be advertised. We can't talk about how great this class is going to be and then not give anybody the opportunity to sign up for it because nobody knows it exists. Like we made a step in the right direction and then we froze it right where we were because we couldn't do it on time. And we could have, except that we wanted to make a push, but the push wasn't being made the right way. And I think in relation to policy that it works the same way. We want a policy to be placed, but we need people to know about the policy because words on paper only do as much as they do if people know what the words say. And it can't just be one or two people who know. Like everybody has to be able to know. It's so much more than just oh, but we wrote policy on it. Okay, well, we wrote it, but what's next? How do we make sure it's being put in place? How do we make sure that schools are following it? How do we hold principals, administration, teachers, and students accountable for the policy? And how do we say at the beginning of the year, every student isn't just handed a piece of paper, but more we spend a day on school, or even 10 to 15 minutes on the announcements. These are the policies for this year regarding equity. This is what you do if you are in a situation where these policies are not being followed. Here is who you report it to, and this is what they will do when you report it.
And I just wanted to speak to the financial aspect of equity. As Dr. Fergus was mentioning, all these different situations. One of the situations is how we spend money in the district. I know, like, there's the simple thing of how teachers, they get food for catering. You would like to think that for equitable purposes, there's also thinking of minority-owned businesses where we're getting money spent over in those businesses to support them as well. So there's that equitable stance where we need to also look financially about how we're spending money, where we're putting the money as well in terms of equitability.
Samantha, if I can just address, some of the things you were just bringing up, were you also concerned about just the communication? So if we have like a statement that potentially can turn into a policy, having that communication, which I think we discussed as a policy committee for many of our policies, to make sure that the outreach is there and that everyone's aware of it. So is that part of your point? Just making sure that, if this happens, that it's implemented, but everybody knows about it.
Yeah, because I think that as a district, we have a great mindset and push for equity, but communication, and I know it's been a tough year, communication is not where it should be. And it obviously there's a million things that go on behind the scenes, and I don't know about all of it. And we've been doing great as a district. And the fact that we're even talking about this is a lot more than a lot of other places can say. But like, we're just as like all these other places that we go, oh, but they're not talking at all about policy. How do we know we're talking about it if nobody knows that we ever made a policy? And I think it's so important. Like, communication is what makes a policy work. So our policy is only as good as it's communicated to people.
And I think, if I may, I think what, this is it's such a great conversation, because it's reminding me of, I teach a policy analysis class to grad students. So I walk through sort of there's policy, and then there's regulation, and then there's guidance. And what Samantha's describing is guidance, because we can say this is what we're supposed to be doing, but somebody's got to translate that stuff into action, right? And I think what Samantha's highlighting even in this one example, right, is where was the guidance in terms of what's the processes that now need to bring this to life, right? This requirement that a simple thing as an absence of advertising not only sort of limits the possibility of who gets to be in the course, but it may continue to project the idea that though we have an approach towards equity around a particular course, the experience of it is leaving the idea that maybe we're just doing the same thing that we've always done, and not really manifested in sort of this new shift. And that takes work, right? To kind of recognize that we've got to create better guidance so that folks know, now that we're required to do this, this is what it's going to involve in terms of the day-to-day steps to make it happen.
Hearing this, it points to a need for just ongoing, I would say, monetization, in a sense of an ideal world where we wouldn't be able to capture policies and regulations that would prevent transgression of anything that would negatively impact the culture of inclusion. But I do think in acknowledging, just how a community grows, and how there are nuances and things that we become a little more acute to that should be captured, included as we continuously revisit the policy. I know in Oakland, Eddie, there was some mention or review of a board or advisory committee that was charged with, and again, correct me where I'm wrong in outlining some of this understanding, that was charged with just reviewing and assuring that we kept accountable, to achieving some of the standards that were meant to be upheld in the creative policy, and also that is capturing some of the nuances that are happening that give more examples to areas that need to be revised or updated as we go further. And reviewing just some of the recommendations, I didn't see that there, but I thought it was worth just putting out there, that there would be, I think, a need for ongoing just review of how we're doing with this promise. Because I imagine a year from now, when the leaders who are on this call graduate, just to keep this being paid forward, and also to keep this culture that we're talking about creating now, to keep it upheld. I don't see it happening in a one-shot deal.
While I was talking earlier, I was muted. I just wanted to say that this is an example of the rich conversations that happen on a monthly basis. And a lot of the conversations from the students, and some of which are not here, a lot of it stems from being part of the process, because as the consumers, they want to be part of the change that they want to see reflected in schools, and particularly in their day-to-day experiences. So I think some of the students in the room that I've engaged on a monthly basis, a lot of what they want to see is their voices included in a lot of the decisions that are being made throughout the district, and within the work that will impact what happens when they're in the classroom, or the choices that will be made to help them succeed in the future.
And I think back to, we were talking about a working statement, it's a statement that's ongoing, right? There could be tweaks and changes as you go along. And many of our students now that might be going on and graduating and career ready or going on to college, and then another group of students kind of take their role and they keep going. But I think having these voices tonight, and then Dr. Estrella, those monthly meetings you have are so important, so critical to the success of Norwalk Public Schools, right? Having that dialogue and those conversations ongoing, because it kind of helps us to craft and formulate a statement. And, I know, Samantha, you had mentioned, we talked about communication, and, if you have a policy and no one knows about it, what good does it do, right? If there's not enough outreach and not enough discussion and every kind of buzzing about it and talking about it. And I think that's really, really important. So I think as we continue to work on this, we want to, hopefully we have a live, an audience that's watching this tonight, but if not, getting the word out that we're working on this. And it's a process. It's not a one policy tonight and we're done. It's going to be an ongoing thing that we're going to keep working on till we have it right. And we want to keep including our student reps tonight to be part of these type of conversations.
Heidi,
Bob,
can you
did
hear
you
me?
want? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Diana, go ahead.
I also want to bring up the fact that when I campaigned 2 years ago, my biggest experience, and for me it was very important to hear from the students, is that students actually put together meetings to meet members that were running for the Board of Education, members that wanted to hear what you had to say, and members that actually believed in what you were saying. I know November's right around the corner, and I know with COVID, things had shut down a lot, but now as things are starting to open up, I think that it's very important also that you as students, get to meet the new members that are going to come up and that are going to be voted for, and, have those conversations with families and, the adults that will be voting for these people, because we have to be open. We have to be listening to you. I think for me, to be honest with you, it meant a lot to me when I spoke to one of the students from Brian McMahon, and she was at the meeting, and their questions were very detailed but they were listening to what we were saying. And they were very, it was important to them to know about safety, equity, and things like that. So for me to run into her months later and for her to say to me, I cannot believe that you actually listened and you asked that question and you followed through. So it's not only in policy, we have to look at the bigger picture to be able to help you make all these changes, for us to listen to you and to be able to give you the area, the growth, the education that everyone and every child should have. And I always say all because it is definitely all. And actually, I'm looking forward to now that events are going to start opening up, meeting all of you in person, and be able to have conversations, more detailed conversations.
Thank you, Diana. Bob, did you want to add anything else to the
Yeah, well,
conversation?
just picking up on what Sam and Roja said, I think to some degree there has to be a reimagining of student voice in the buildings. I think now student voice seems to be confined to class officers, student government, and they seem to be making decisions around what a lot of students consider to be very trivial issues. What t-shirts, what apparel do we design? Where do we go for prom? And a lot of it is fundraising, as opposed to making substantial change in the building in partnership with the adults in the building. And I think that's a really critical missing link. And I think we may be sending the wrong message to students that your participation in where is prom, where we're doing this, where we're doing that, that's really student voice. And it really isn't. A lot of them, they don't realize that sometimes student prom, the location for the prom is decided on a year before because you have to get a contract. And I think if there was more opportunity for ongoing substantial conversations with students, I think it would be helpful.
I was hoping for that. That's what I'm looking at, is the bigger picture. The students being part of who's being voted in and the person that's going to actually listen. Because for me, I'm not deciding on where's prom going to be. I am actually listening to bigger things about facilities, policies, finances. So if I can have that opportunity to sit down and listen, I will be able to ask questions at these meetings that you would want to know. Or I'm learning from you because you're the ones that are in the classrooms. You're the ones that have to experience everything. So for me, that is a good place for these students to be able to make their mark and have their voices heard, because it's on a bigger level, a bigger picture. So just keep in mind that you are a student. However, you can influence an adult. You can help, an adult can be your speaker at these meetings if you're not there. And also, like for tonight, spread the word, let your friends, tell your friends, listen to the recording, watch what they said, what was brought up, have them questions. And anyone can email us as Board of Ed members, so that we can have our discussions behind closed doors and be able to move forward with things.
If I may, sorry, I was just taking notes. From my experience, I'm not a student representative, but I'm not. So one thing I have seen is that our student representatives, even when making decisions on these issues, most students are not aware that this is happening. Most students are not aware that these conversations are happening, that these decisions are being made. When my CGS student representatives are making a decision, I don't know until later when Ms. Parm sends out an email, because she sends out emails every time there's a policy change. Everybody gets an email that says asterisk, 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 policy change, or whatever, for example. So that's the only way that we know something's happening, right? So I do definitely think that for that to happen, for us to have a better influence on adults, students need to have a lot more conversation within themselves.
See, and Heidi, a really good example of that is the work that Nia was doing with her friends at Norwalk High. A more recent example would be at McMahon in the social justice course that Sam brought up. Mrs. McAndrew has been great. They simply asked her for the syllabus and then the opportunity to change the syllabus based on what they have read, what they have seen, the music they're listening to, and so on. And Mrs. McAndrew says, "You got to be kidding me! Of course, let's sit down and talk." And it would be great, you know, if that was across all disciplines, I think that would be great.
And you can tell with those things that these are people like great to sit down and talk about things and say like, oh, this is what we as students want. But I think a lot of students can agree. We hear a lot of, and I think on the district level, it's been a lot better about we hear you and we actually want to do this. But within school levels, it's a lot of let's hear what you have to say. Oh, they said it, and we'll take it into consideration, and it's never brought up again. So I think with student voice, it's also like actually acknowledging that student voice means more than being able to say, oh, but we had a student voice in on this. Like it can seem sometimes that students may have very different opinions than the adults in the building. But instead of thinking, I think we have to change our viewpoint and instead of thinking that, oh, it's because they're students, think that because we're students, maybe we have a better viewpoint on a certain situation than an adult who sees it from the adult who is in charge of the situation than the student who has to be there and deal with it.
I would like to add on to what's being said. I think it's a very important topic about simply being transparent about what's going on and allowing student voices to be involved. As Alejandra pointed out, majority of us don't know what is going on in regards to policy making, actually even on a district level. The awareness of the students of what's being decided about how our educational lives are going to go being put forward, or simply, as Sam noted, in our schools, we do not know about these changes. I know Nora Kai had a change in passing time. I don't know the amount of student voice involved, but there was much outrage. And same in our school, we had the passing time change as well to 10 minutes, yet we weren't exactly involved in that process.
You know, I think all of you brought up really good points. And I also think being as transparent as possible, right? And then having ongoing conversations. So, we don't want it to be, I don't think anyone's intention is to have a meeting and then that's student voice and we move on. I mean, I think we want to change that look. That's not what we want to do. We want to have ongoing discussions and conversations and having all you, and I know Alejandro, you had mentioned you're not a student rep, you're a student leader, all of you are. Right? You're here tonight and you're ready to talk about it. And you want to give some valuable input and make some changes. So, I mean, we applaud all of you tonight. All of your thoughts and ideas are really valuable for us in order for us to continue to craft this statement and then possibly leading into a policy. And it helps because you're all in the school, you're there every day. What better advocates than all of you, because you see it, you hear it, you breathe it on a daily basis. And you're all advocates. And I think it would be important. I think Diana had mentioned, spread the word out. This is on YouTube. We want as many people to be involved, but, talk to your other peers about what's going on and maybe what their input is. And maybe you can bring that back to the table here next time when we have our next policy meeting, because we want to hear everyone's voice. I mean, it really, and we're not just saying it, it's really important in order for us to work on this statement/policy the way we all want to see it. Any other thoughts or ideas or suggestions?
Heidi,
Yeah.
You mentioned a statement, Heidi. You may want to look at Easton and Reading. They just issued their statement about equity and diversity, and their final statement actually removed the word equity.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I know it's a very, very
Yeah.
different school district
Yeah.
to combined, but that's just another example of a statement.
Okay.
That was a statement, not a policy?
Yeah, they did a statement first, Brenda.
Okay.
And I think I can dig it up. I can probably get it and send it to Brenda.
That would be
And then
great.
also just everyone, the document that Brenda shared earlier, that was not the complete document from Stanford. That was the initial review by students.
Yeah.
The second review included all of the definitions of the words and phrases that they suggested. And I can get that to Brenda as well.
That would be great, Bob. If you could send that to me too, would be
Sure.
awesome in the policy committee. You know, we talked about like kind of a working statement and then possibly leading into a policy, but I know for all of our student reps or leaders and everybody that's here tonight, having something once we craft it, once we establish it, to really have it at every school. And I know many of you had mentioned you have something, how does everybody know? Having, you know, meetings with principals with their staff, teachers with their students, you know, so everybody is really part of the process and everyone knows what's happening. So I tend to agree, sometimes when you make certain policies, whatever it may be, maybe it's not disseminated in the way where outreach is for everyone. So I think something in this magnitude, we really want to kind of moving forward, that everyone is aware and they're, you know, they know exactly what's happening and there aren't any surprises and they're part of the process and part of the dialogue. But thank you. Yep. Go ahead.
Really quick. The idea of having whatever it may be,
right,
communicated down through the line of teachers to students, I think is a great idea. However, I also think that hearing it from the principal or from some administration gives it more power, as a teacher can choose not to mention it in their classroom, and then a student may believe that it only revolves or only is involved in the classrooms that it's mentioned in. Hearing it from a principal means that, or any administration of any type, means that it happens in the school, not just in the classroom during class time.
Not just that, some teachers, for example, don't check their emails or don't check anything else. So how are they supposed to communicate to us if they don't even check to see what's happening? Not only that, like Samantha said, a lot of teachers won't say it or maybe choose not to say it because they think it doesn't apply to their classroom. So hearing from an administrator makes it seem like it's not only a lot more important, but that applies to everyone and everything. So yeah, I definitely agree with you.
You know, maybe from your input, it could be a school-wide, right? Where there's discussion, where everybody is part of it, in the auditorium, and there's conversations about what we've done. So everybody is aware.
Is the best way to go about it. I think, and I know we haven't done assemblies this year, but
yeah,
obviously things are changing. And I think this has to be more than just, hey, this is your policy, this is your statement. And it has to genuinely be, this is what this is, but do you have a question? Do you need to know more? We're like, make it into more where a student knows that this is because of them and about them and for them.
If I might add, I actually kind of disagree with you in terms of the fact of having large scale discussions, just because of the fact if you assemble 50 or 60 students in an auditorium, it's usually gonna be like the same 10 or so to speak because everybody else does not want to speak because nobody wants to say something that everybody else is gonna think that's wrong, shun them for it, and then oops, lost popularity, lost their friends, or be insulted, or just be that nobody wants that. So I think small scale discussions in your classroom with a group of 10, 15 students, that is fine. But when you're making it large, like an auditorium or cafeteria based discussion, it's huge, it's not going to be as effective.
I think bringing both Sam and Alejandra's ideas together would be a powerful thing, because simply having the students being informed of what is going on, as Samantha mentioned, in a large scale kind of audience in a during like a group session would be great. Having everyone in the auditorium hearing what this policy is going to be, how they're all going to be effective. They wouldn't have to raise their voice in that moment if they didn't want to, and maybe offering these small sessions later in which they can voice their opinion about, maybe I would like this to change. So these both being available to the students would be a very powerful thing.
I love the way you put that. You know, you, Samantha and Alejandra, you both have differing opinions, but you're able to kind of come together. You know, maybe have it at a small scale, then maybe have it a larger. But that's an ongoing discussion, and how it kind of would be disseminated, and how that outreach and how the voices could, everyone's voice could be heard. But and that's okay to have differing opinions on things, but it's important as a group that you kind of come together. You know, even as a board, 9-member board, we don't always agree. We just don't. We all have different opinions, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we come to the best understanding of what's best for Norwalk Public Schools. And you both, all of you actually kind of came to that together with differing thoughts and opinions. So we appreciate that.
And to add to, like, I agree with Alejandro, and I wasn't thinking of that because
Yeah.
I'm one of those students who would raise my hand
Yeah.
and speak. But to add to the anonymity, like, of even in a classroom discussion, I understand that you might not want to say something that might be
Yeah.
controversial. Having an open, whether it's a suggestion box or a Google
Mhm.
form
Sure.
for all year. So it's not just that one day that it's brought up where you can say,
Mhm.
hey, I thought this was on the policy and I had this situation. I'm not sure if it applies. Can you tell me? Here's a question I have, or here's something I think should change. And it can be anonymous, or it can be like with your name on it.
You
Great.
can do it through platforms like,
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but there's a platform called Padlet. You could easily go on that and do anonymous, right? And say, okay, I agree with this, make one column. I don't agree with this. I would rather see this, for example, right? And have people anonymously add this. And these go on for a long time. Like they only expire after like a few months or so. You can easily set that. So by having this, people can easily access it through Google Classroom, remind their email, so on and so forth. Just come in here, write this down and say, okay, I said something. This will help make a decision. And I don't have to worry about me being affected personally.
Just to add on to that, great idea. I think there should be a hotline involved in that somehow, because I know some students are able to connect more to others verbally, and that expresses not only more emotion, but honesty and sincerity. So I agree, Google Forms is also a great idea. But I feel like sometimes if you tell a student to write down what exactly they're feeling, they're gonna feel this like pressure of putting the perfect word, the exact word they need. And if they don't convey the message, then it might go downhill. So I feel like having that verbal communication will also help, because they don't have to have so much pressure. They just express what they're feeling as a student.
Thank you. Well, for time purposes, I'm going to stop here for this particular topic for tonight. And we will have all of you that are here present tonight come back to our next policy meeting, and we'll give you a date and time when that will happen. But we really do, and this is coming from myself and the whole policy committee and staff that's involved tonight, truly appreciate how eloquent and how you were able to really verbalize your thoughts and your feelings on this topic. So it hasn't gone unnoticed, and we want to thank all of you really for coming tonight. We really do appreciate everything and all the input that you had. It's all valuable to us. It truly is. And also the next item on our agenda is the discussion of Student Bill of Rights. And I kind of mentioned this in the beginning of our meeting tonight. I'm thinking, Bob, the Center for Youth Leadership is kind of been working on this. So I think it would be nice to have some of the students, from Norwalk High School, from PTech, CGS to kind of work together. Maybe all of you can kind of, get together at some point via Zoom, whatever platform you wanted to use to do that. Give us your thoughts on that, and we can bring you back for a future meeting. It's on our radar. Believe me, I have notes written everywhere, so I know how important this is. But I think it's important that you all have that discussion, what you're looking for in a Bill of Rights, kind of brainstorm some ideas, and then we can bring that back to policy. And that might be under the umbrella of a statement, like a working statement, or it could go right into our policy. I don't know yet, but we kind of have to see what you have and what you can bring back to the committee. Are you all okay on that? I'm kind of working on that. Okay, take the thumbs up on that. Okay, perfect. So we'll do that. And the next item on our agenda is public comments. I think, Brenda, you had mentioned there are no public comments. Are there any tonight?
There were none submitted ahead of time.
Okay.
We have one other person in the queue. If they have a public comment, would you please raise your hand? I don't know if they're just observing. I think we're all set.
Okay. Before we end, we kind of have to have a hard stop at about 6:40 because then we'll be transitioning over to our full board meeting. Do any of our students have any other discussion, or Dr. Fergus, Tom Mooney, Bob Cosienda. Is anything else that you want to mention before we end our meeting tonight? Or any board members or Alex?
I would just like to say I'm so, as you said, Heidi, the students have been great. And I just want to, note the way in which you all support each other's comments and give each other the microphone. I'm just like, I'm sitting here like,
Yeah.
You're modeling what sort of as adults we should also practice more often too, right? You all did a great job, and can't wait to see y'all more often.
It's so impressive. I mean, and I, have a student now in high school, North High, and I have kids that have gone through the high school, and the way you're able to really articulate and work together, like you're all, I like your idea is different. Let's kind of come together. We can work this together, and that's what's part of these type of committees. And I hope that all of you will continue this, through high school, you're graduating, through college, through career. And then it's always important, as Diana mentioned, other kids are coming up. So be able to share your thoughts and your ideas and kind of mentor, right, other students, because you've all had a voice tonight and you were able to articulate it, I thought, really, really well. And we appreciate that. We truly do. Godfrey or Diana? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Bob.
I just honestly, I want to echo all the appreciation shared for youth participation tonight, and emphasize how thankful I am of the accountability that you're holding us to. I welcome this, and I look forward to having more of these dialogues.
Great.
I just want to say kudos to the students. This is one of many conversations. I know they've been engaging with different members of the cabinet and bringing forward their ideas. So I'm really proud of the conversations you're having, and also how you're pushing the adults to really listen to what you want to see differently within the school, but most importantly within the classrooms that you spend most of your days in, and the work that you want to foresee to prepare you for the future. So thank you for your insight.
Yes, and I want to say thank you for giving us this time that is very valuable for you and for us, where we're learning from you, the most important voices. And I look forward to more meetings and listening and having in-depth discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone coming. Again, we will keep you updated when our next policy committee meeting will be, and we hope that you all can join us. We're looking forward to having all of you back. All right. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor? So moved. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank
We'll see you
you.
soon.